Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everybody. As you're coming in, can you please introduce yourself in the chat, put your organization, pronouns. Buenos días a todos. Mientras se unen a la llamada, si por favor pudieran introducirse con su nombre, su pronombre y su organización en el chat. Estamos muy entusiasmados que estén aquí ahora. We're super excited that all of you are here today, joining us during this great presentation that we're going to have soon.
Buenos días, Dani, qué gusto verte.
Buenos días, Adriana. Good morning, Adriana.
Buenos días, soy Janet Martínez de Coco, Community College.
Hi, good morning. Buenos días, Olivia.
Gracias.
To give it a few more minutes before we get started, les vamos a dar unos minutos más antes que empecemos. Y luego, we'll give it a few more minutes before we get started. We'll get started right at 10:05.
This is Pamela Raleigh from Community Coalition.
Hi, great. Thank you for being here. We'll give it 2 more minutes. We're expecting a large crowd today. Happy to see everybody. Le vamos a dar 2 minutos más y luego empezamos. We'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning. This is Raúl Moreno from Moreno Institute and Moreno Cis Foundation.
Hi, Raúl. Welcome.
I do have to apologize. I need to step out at 10:35.
Okay, no worries.
I did not want to miss it.
Okay, no worries. We're happy you're here, and we will be recording and sending over the presentation slides. And you're always welcome to email one of us for any more information. So Raúl dijo que se tiene que ir a las 10:35 y no hay ningún problema. Vamos a andar mandando la grabación y también vamos a mandar las dispositivas después. Thank you everyone who's introducing themselves in the chat. Gracias a todos por introducirse en el chat. Vamos a empezar cortamente. We're gonna get started here. Shortly. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We are so excited that you can join us on today's policy platform conversation. Give me 1 second as I try to mute this.
Hi, this is Lichelle from Community Coalition.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much. Empezaremos ahorita. As you all know, before I get started, my name is Daniela Alvarenga. I am an economic justice policy analyst with the California Immigrant Policy Center, and I will be guiding you through today's presentation as we get started. Welcome, everybody. Buenos días, mi nombre es Daniela. Yo voy a ser las que los va a estar guiando a través de esta presentación ahora. Antes que empezar, vamos a dar un anuncio brevemente sobre la interpretación. Vamos a tener interpretación de inglés a español. So before we get started, I want to give a few minutes to our interpreters to give a couple of instructions around our interpretation from English to Spanish. Edgar, I pass it over to you. Si nuestro intérprete puede presentarse.
Thank you, Daniela. The following message will repeat in Spanish. Hello, everyone. Please select your preferred language by clicking in the globe. The globe will appear momentarily as the interpretation feature is turned on. Press the globe icon at the bottom of your screen or tap the three dots on your phone or tablet and select language interpretation. Choose English or Spanish as your preferred language. Select Mute Original Audio and click Done to activate the interpretation feature. If a participant speaks in English, the interpreter will provide real-time interpretation into Spanish. For tech assistance, please let us know via chat and we will be happy to help you. Enjoy your event. Buenos días. Hola a todos. Asegúrense de seleccionar su idioma de preferencia haciendo clic en el globo terráqueo que aparecerá en un momento mientras de que se activa la interpretación. Este icono se encuentra en la parte inferior de su pantalla o los tres puntitos en su teléfono o tableta. Seleccionando Interpretación o Language Interpretation depende de su función. Elija inglés o español como su idioma de preferencia. Seleccione Silenciar el audio original o Mute Original Audio. Y luego presione Finalizar para activar la función de interpretación. Si un participante habla en inglés, el intérprete interpretará automáticamente todos los comentarios al español en tiempo real. Si necesita ayuda técnica, no dude en comunicarse con nosotros a través del chat. Con gusto le asistiremos. Disfruten su evento. Ms. Daniela, back to you.
Thank you so much, Edgar. Can we go ahead and enable the interpretation?
Interpretations live.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. So welcome. Is everybody good at interpretation? I can't really see, so if people can just give me a thumbs up. Great. So I'm here with the California Immigrant Policy Center. This series is part of our Immigrant Day of Action trainings as we prepare to bring over 1,000 people to the Capitol this year. Part of the work that we've been doing is advocating for legislation that advances the lives of immigrant communities here in California. And we do that through policy and advocacy. This year, our policy platform consists of 6 priorities, which we will learn more about today. And as we go through each of them, I will ask that we're going to do it in sections, and questions can be answered at the end of each section. But before then, as I go through the agenda as well, we will go through what to expect the day of April 9th, a little bit of background on how we got to the policy platform, and then we're going to go into each of the priorities. And then we're going to have quick announcements for folks, and then wrap up with any additional questions people may have, and then send you on your way to the rest of your day. So for our first portion, we want to give you all a quick overview of what to expect when you get to the Capitol. We're going to have breakfast and check-in from 8:30 to 10 a.m. We will do a community grounding and welcome from 9 to 9:30 a.m. And then throughout the day, we will be having lobby visits, 10 to 2:30. We're going to have lobby visit prep, legislative Q&A with our government affairs team. And then during the rally portion, which will begin at around 12 p.m., we're going to be having great speakers, cultural performances. We're very excited to have Tamborazo Banda Corazón Azteca, who will be showing up with their booths, their instruments, and just creating a great ambiance for all of us. From 1 to 1:30, we will have a group photo. We'll provide more information on what that looks like the day of, and then sort of go into the rest of the day, really focusing on community, connecting, and celebrating with each other, as we don't get the opportunity to connect and be together as often. So we're very excited about that. We'll have some great treats and bullies from the vendors that we had last year. And We're excited to have you all there and answer any questions that you may have towards the end of the presentation. For now, I'm going to take us into the next section of our presentation today. As I mentioned, the policy platform priorities as I mentioned, the policy platform priorities are what we're going to focus on during the advocacy and legislative day. This year, how we came to the priorities was opened up a nomination process for folks where they submitted the bills and budget priorities that they were working on. And then from those had a voting period where all of the people who have been involved with CIPC had an opportunity to vote. We really wanted to ensure that the priorities that we uplifted this year were centered on what you all wanted to see. So 4 of those priorities were voted on, and then 2 priorities are CIPC priorities that we have been working in conjunction with several of our partners. Our first priority that we're going to go into is economic mobility for all, AB 667 and C 3.0. I'm very excited to introduce my colleague Edgar Ortiz, who is going to share a little bit more about this. Edgar, I pass it on to you.
Thanks so much, Daniela. Good morning. It's so great to see everybody. If we haven't met before and this is our first time, it's great to meet you. My name is Edgar Ortiz. I'm the Economic Justice Policy Manager with the California Immigrant Policy Center, and I'm here to talk about one of our biggest economic justice priorities for this year, which is economic mobility for all. And this encompasses both a legislative and budget act for supporting programs that bring important economic opportunities for immigrants across all of California, regardless of immigration status. Next slide, please. So what specifically are we going to be asking of our elected leaders in Sacramento? When we go into the legislative visits, we're going to be asking them to support economic mobility for Californians by passing Assembly Bill 667 and supporting a $15 million budget request over the next 4 years for the Social Entrepreneurs for Economic Development Initiative, which I believe many orgs who are on this call have engaged on in the past. So we're very excited to be able to continue this important initiative together with you all. Next slide, please. So in terms of talking points, so let me take a step back. For some people who might not know, Assembly Bill 667, which is sponsored by our champion Assembly member Jose Solache, would allow individuals who have limited English proficiency to have an opportunity to bring an interpreter with them when they're taking a professional license, which is important to be able to get your foothold into a wide variety of careers, from accounting to education, engineering, healthcare careers, all important pathways for economic mobility that we want to ensure are accessible for all of our communities. And that's a good segue into one of the main talking points that we're going to be asking our partners to elevate in their visits. And this is how all Californians should be able to fully realize their education and professional aspirations. For too long, we've been under a workforce development and employment system that unfortunately restricts individuals based on their language, background, or immigration status from being able to work in the job that they love. And so because of that, they've had to make compromises and tough choices where maybe they've had to work in jobs that are not aligned with their own aspirations, their own goals, their own passions, and that can oftentimes leave them exposed to more labor rights violations, including no payment for overtime, being forced to work under dangerous conditions, experiencing retaliation, and generally not providing the pathways for career advancement that other community members are able to benefit from. This is something that we absolutely don't think should be the case, especially under the uncertain economic situation we're dealing with in California, as well as the hateful xenophobic attacks that our immigrant communities are facing from the federal government. So we want to make sure that our community's economic needs aren't going unmet, that everybody should be able to work in their chosen profession that they're passionate about, to be able to support themselves and their loved ones on their own terms. Next slide, please. Another talking point for why we want to have economic mobility for all, again, is the fact that we all know that it's getting harder and harder to live in California. The rich are getting richer. People with lower incomes haven't seen a meaningful wage increase in many years. And this is getting worse as we're continuing to experience budget cuts from the federal government, as well as economic inequality, where it's getting harder for people to afford to be in California and be able to pay for essentials like food, medicine, and housing. And this is something that, again, is going to continue to get worse. And we know that immigrant communities are going to be the first ones to experience this, and it's going to hit us the hardest. And we're historically last in line in terms of getting support. And so that's why we want to elevate policies like AB 667 and see it as important resources that we can use to support our community members who have limited English proficiency and undocumented immigrants who are being heavily impacted by the current state of affairs. Next slide, please. And then one more talking point that we feel is especially important to elevate in the conversations we're having with elected officials is how California's economic success and prosperity really is tied to the well-being and prosperity of immigrant communities as a whole. And so we've seen that when we've led on this issue of economic mobility, such as when we work together to expand access to professional licenses for individuals with individual taxpayer identification numbers, when we translated professional license examinations for barbering, cosmetology, and construction into non-English languages, and supporting immigrant entrepreneurship, be it through small business creation or worker-owned cooperatives. We saw how immigrants and their families were able to prosper and be able to have what they needed to be able to support themselves and their loved ones. Now is the time to double down on these strategies and continue to expand on proven methods that have been shown to help elevate our communities going forward. Next slide, please. And so we aren't expecting a lot of significant pushback on these priorities. As of now, they've been getting a lot of bipartisan support, which is really good. But we also do want to make sure that folks are prepared in case you do get any rebuttals about these proposals. And these are just some things that we're anticipating that we want to inoculate everybody going into the conversation. So I think across the board, not just economic mobility for all, we're seeing that there's a hesitation to fund stuff because it's getting to be a very complicated budget situation and that these proposals could be very expensive. Well, our retort to that would be that immigrants are an integral reason for why California is the 5th largest economy in the world to begin with. And again, when you're meeting the specific needs of immigrant workers and when you're removing barriers that allow them to be able to enter the workforce and be able to receive whatever support they need to realize their educational and career goals, we see a parallel upward trajectory for the state that can help all of our communities benefit as a whole. Another rebuttal that we might hear is, and this is one that many people here know really well, which is, well, if immigrants would spend more time learning English or better assimilating into the country, then they would be deserving of better access to economic opportunities. We feel that this is not only logically flawed, but also it goes against the morals of California being a state that welcomes all individuals, regardless of background, language, or immigration status, and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to be able to thrive. We should be adopting policies that aren't trying to fix people, but that are recognizing and celebrating the diversity of languages, backgrounds, and skill sets that people are bringing every day and want to develop to be able to practice in the communities that they love, in the state that they call home, and that they are able to work together to realize all of their aspirations. Next slide, please. And then the last slide is frequently asked questions that come up with regards to both economic mobility for all's priorities. And the first one would be, how much is this going to cost? We're asking for $15 million annually over the next 4 years, or $60 million in total to be able to expand access to entrepreneurship opportunities through the SEED initiative. With regards to AB 667 and language access, we think that the cost would be very minimal because we're not asking the state, although we very much like to provide interpreters on their own. It's just more of leveling the playing field and allowing individuals from diverse language groups to be able to do something that is already allowed in various other occupations. So it's just standardizing existing practices. And again, by allowing people to be able to obtain licenses and be able to enter new professions or even be able to advance in those, we can see them gain greater earning power, have more applications that are being submitted for these specific professions, and that will lead to a net gain as a whole for all of our communities. In terms of who's supporting this, well, we hope everybody here is already supporting it, but in case you want to know a little bit of background behind this, this was created by the Economic Mobility for All Coalition, which several folks on the call here are part of. It's great to see you all. And we're a coalition of advocates working together to expand access to education, training, career opportunities for immigrants across the state. And then why we're advancing these as a package, it's because we want to ensure that professional licensing and entrepreneurship continue to be supported, given that there are some of the few pathways to economic opportunity that anyone, regardless of immigration status, is able to obtain, and that advancing these together can lead to a lot of positive benefits for our communities as a whole. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edgar, for uplifting the importance of AB 667 and C 3.0. We know that it's important for people who have learned their skills in their home country can come and apply that here in the US, and that entrepreneurs have the access to funds that they need to support their businesses. For our next presenter, I will pass it over to my colleague Bruno, who will share a little bit more about our budget priority to bolster California's immigrant legal services programs. Bruno, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Daniela. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Bruno Zat, with the Supervising Policy Manager with the California Immigrant Policy Center. I'm going to be talking about our budget priority to strengthen California's Immigration Legal Services Program. This budget request is sponsored by CIPC, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, ILRC, the Central American Resource Center of Los Angeles, Garrison, LA, the Immigrant Legal Defense, ILD, Services, Immigrant Rights and Education Network, SIREN, Spirit Institute of Justice, and is supported by nearly 150 organizations across the state. We're working with Assemblymember Mio Bonta in the Assembly, Oakland, and then Senator Maria Elena Durazo from Los Angeles in the Senate. Next slide. So this proposal requests a $60 million increase in state funding for immigration legal services to defend immigrant children, youth, college students, workers, and families who are at risk of arrest, detention, deportation, and family separation. There's current programs in place because of the collective advocacy this movement has done. Since 2015, the state of California has invested state funding to provide immigration legal services to individuals and families seeking immigration assistance and facing deportation. So currently, the state funds $75 million every year, and we're asking the state to increase $60 million for more legal services to be available to families and communities now facing potential arrest and deportation. Next slide. So we know this, one of our main talking points is this is about equity. California is stronger when all of its residents feel safe and supported, and we need our state, California, to step up to continue and expand the funding for immigration legal services so children, adults, workers, and families have access to a lawyer when facing detention and/or deportation. Next slide. Use the noise in the background. And this budget priority is about protecting all of us, all Californians. California is home to the largest immigrant population in the country. We are hearing about mass raids, mass deportations from the new administration, and we know California families are disproportionately impacted. So as Trump threatens to enact more raids, more detentions, more deportations, California must step up to continue funding immigration legal services to keep families together and protect all California residents. Next slide. It's about being safe and welcome here in our state. California has always been a home for immigrants. Immigrants built this state to be the 5th largest economy in the world every single day. So these legal services keep Californians, keep immigrants with their families, with their schools, with their workplaces, and with their houses of worship, and with their communities. And in order to defend people from Trump's mass deportation, California must continue increasing state funding for these vital services to keep families together and safe. Next slide. So something we've been hearing, we've been providing public comment at state budget hearings. We've been meeting with budget offices, legislative offices, and something we're hearing is that the state budget, although we're the 5th largest economy in the world, the state budget is uncertain because of the fires in Los Angeles that's costing the state billions more than expected, than budgeted for, and the potential threats of cuts from the Trump administration of federal funding to healthcare, disaster relief, et cetera. And so, our response is, yes, we acknowledge that the state budget can be impacted due to these potential cuts and is so uncertain. However, the Trump administration's #1 priority is to arrest, detain, and deport children, workers, and families who are immigrants. We know the MAGAs, Trump administration, all of his goons are hell-bent on criminalizing our communities, including children, families, and will do everything they can to arrest and deport as many people as they can. And so California must prioritize additional funding to defend the safety and rights of California's families, workers, and communities. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this. You'll have this slide after this presentation. But one of the questions we've received is, didn't the California legislature already increase funding this year for immigration legal services? Yes, they did. In December of last year, the governor called for a special session to respond to the Trump administration. So from December to February, the California legislature passed 3 bills to respond to the Trump administration. One was on funding the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office, to be able to sue the Trump administration, which they're doing on the attack on birthright citizenship and other attacks. Wildfire response, investing billions of dollars to respond to the LA fires. And then number 3, $25 million for immigration and civil legal services. And so $10 million went to the California Department of Social Services for these immigration programs that we're talking about out of that $25 million. But yes, the legislature did invest it, and it was a good start. But we know the attacks 2 months in are escalating on immigrant families. And so California must continue investing our state dollars, our tax dollars, to immigration legal services that keep families together and safe. And the last one is, which legal services programs will be increased? All current funding, there's various programs. Some organizations on this call are probably providers of these critical programs. We're asking for $60 million to increase all of these programs. And it's listed here. I won't go through them all, but you'll have these available. And so we're looking to strengthen all of these California immigration programs, provide free legal services and representation to children, workers, and families. I'll pass it back to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for emphasizing the importance of continuing to fund immigration legal services programs. For our next presenter, we're going to have Faith Lee talk a little bit more about the California Safe Haven Schools and Child Act. I will pass it over to Faith Lee.
Thank you, Janela. My name is Faith. Hi, everyone. I am the Legislative Director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Southern California. Happy to share with you, and so amazing to see so many of you on this call today. Excited to share about a bill that we're working on alongside the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, CHIRLA, with the author, Assemblymember Al Morisuchi, to protect our youth and children in our K-12 schools. So next slide, please. So for AB 49, the California Safe Haven Schools and Child Care Act would and will protect immigrant children from actions by the U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement, also known as ICE officers, who enter school sites or child care facilities. So as we all go on this lobby day in a couple of weeks, we're asking legislators to support students and their families by passing this bill. Next slide, please. So what does this bill do? This bill is very simple. This bill would protect undocumented students and their families by limiting and prohibiting ICE officers from entering a school site for any purpose without providing a valid identification, a written statement of purpose, and a valid judicial warrant, as well as approval from the school district's superintendent. And also, if their enforcement action is approved, an ICE officer's access would be restricted to school or childcare facilities where children are not present. So what does this bill do? Why are we trying to pass this bill? It is, of course, about protecting our students, and it's about supporting student learnings, because our students should not be fearing to go to school, as we're seeing a lot of these ICE enforcement happening throughout the state of California and even throughout the country. We need to make sure that parents can feel, safe dropping their kids off of schools, and students don't have to fear ICE enforcement in our state-funded schools in the state of California. Next slide, please. There's probably going to be a lot of rebuttals from Republicans. So a lot of people will ask, well, the state has no power to interfere with federal immigration enforcement. While this is true, we know that in a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, Plyer v. Doe, the court upheld that the right undocumented children are entitled to free public education. Constant immigration enforcement at schools will definitely be an interruption and disruption to children's right to education. And if we're, fear-mongering so students no longer go to school because they don't want to get picked up by ICE, or they don't, their families don't want to get picked up by ICE on their way to school, that is considered a disruption of children's right to education. Okay, sorry that I'm speaking a little bit too fast, and I will slow down a little bit. Another rebuttal that we might hear is that schools are, typically considered sensitive zone. So I will not be really enforcing there anyway. The truth is that as soon as Trump was elected and sworn in, on January 20th, just a couple months ago this year, his administration rescinded a federal guideline that really limited ICE enforcing in sensitive zone area. If you look at his statement that was published by the DHCS, the Trump administration even wrote that criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrests. His administration is really empowering officers, and his administration trusts that law enforcement would use common sense while conducting enforcement. As we've seen throughout the state, whether law enforcement exercise common sense and how that's defined is definitely very questionable. This bill at AB 49 would create a lot of protections, ensuring any state-funded schools employees would really adhere strictly to policies that limit assistance by our public schools with immigration enforcement to the fullest extent possible, consistent with federal and state law. and ensuring that public schools remain safe and accessible to all California residents, regardless of their immigration status. So I think that is all. I'm really excited that you all will be speaking in support of this bill. I really appreciate all of your support. I know that a lot of legislators would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. We are excited to help push this legislation along. We know that ICE has no business in schools and targeting families and students. So we're excited to see this move through the legislature this year. I will pause here for a few minutes to see if there are any questions from our first three presenters. And if not, I can, oh, I see a question from Doug.
Yes, so this is a question, I guess, for Faith. SB 48 by Senator Gonzalez, like AB 49, is also about ICE access in schools. Can you say something about that bill?
Yes, thank you, Doug, for uplifting SB 48. For folks who are on this call might not be familiar, SB 48 by Senator Lina Gonzalez, who represents the Long Beach area, also introduced a piece of legislation very similar to this bill. I would say you could consider them companion bill, so that we know in the both the Assembly and the Senate has similar priorities to protect students in their K-12 schools. SB 48 also limits ICE officers from conducting enforcement in our K-12 schools. So, Assemblymember Rasucci, who's the author of AB 48, is a co-author on this Senate bill as well. And I believe Senator Lina Gonzalez will likely be a co-author on AB 49 as well. So these two are, you can consider them companion bill, which demonstrates the commitment by our legislature, both houses, to ensuring that state schools, public schools, are really adhering the federal and state law to the fullest extent possible to limit ICE enforcement and ensuring that those actions are not performed in front of students. Thank you, Doug, for your question.
Thank you so much, Faith. I see a lot of hands raised, and we're super excited to answer all of your questions. Due to time constraints for this presentation, I do want to say that I see your question, Lynn. I see your question, Jane. I see your hand, Juana and Manuel. If you can please write what you're thinking in the chat, we can either get to it at the end of the call, or we can connect you directly to Faith or any of the other presenters to ensure that you get your questions answered. Apologies in advance. We have an hour today, and I want to make sure that the other presenters get a chance to share about their policy priorities as well. So for our next presenter, we're going to have Bruno Huizar talk a little bit more about the Keep Families Together and what that bill hopes to do. Bruno?
Thank you, Daniela. Can you hear me? All right, great. So the next one is, it was a bill. We are no longer running this bill. So the Keep Families Together Act was sponsored by the ICE at a California coalition, which has passed 3 landmark policies, most recently in 2017, the California Values Act, also known as our state sanctuary law. So this bill, or it's no longer a bill, but we are keeping it on the platform to be able to educate lawmakers on Immigrant Day of Action about the need for legislation to strengthen sanctuary protections here in the state. And so the Keep Families Together Act, some of the talking points we can lift up is that California must ensure all members of the public can access local or state government services and facilities without fear. We know with Trump enacting mass raids, surveillance, and deportations, that families and individuals across the state are terrified to go to school, to go to work, and access the care and services they need for fear of being surveilled, arrested, and separated from their families by immigration enforcement. So legislation to strengthen our sanctuary law, it's about investing in community safety. Research has shown that sanctuary policies that ensure our resources, our local and state resources, are not used for immigration enforcement improves public safety. This is also about reducing California's role in mass deportation. By ending the use of local and state resources to assist in immigration enforcement, we can expand stronger protections and build a safer state for all of us. So we had a bill is not moving forward this year, unfortunately, and we can talk offline about that. We don't have enough time to discuss that. But just to remind you, we're keeping this on the agenda to have the opportunity to educate our lawmakers about the need to update and strengthen our sanctuary protections to keep California families together and safe. Back to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Bruno. It's unfortunate that this act isn't moving forward in the way that we wanted to see it, but we will continue to highlight it and uplift it and really emphasize the importance of this on April 9th in the Capitol, so our legislators can hear just how crucial this is. On to our next presenter, Shannon Camacho with Inclusive Action for the City is going to talk a little bit more about the Street Vendor Business Protection Act. Shannon, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Daniela. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Yes, I'm Shannon with Inclusive Action for the City. I'm very, very excited to talk about SB 635, which is the Street Vendor Business Protection Act, being authored by Senator Maria Elena Durazo. This is a bill that's being co-sponsored by Inclusive Action for the City, CHIRLA, the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice, Public Council, and Community Power Collective. And our organizations are part of the larger coalition, the California Street Vendor Coalition. So excited to talk about the bill with you. Next slide. Thank you. Yes, so I think to give some context in terms of why we decided that a bill like this was needed for this year. So like folks already mentioned through the other bills that are on the platform, obviously immigration enforcement is something that we've seen increase throughout the state. We know that obviously all folks that are immigrants and undocumented are vulnerable and under attack by this administration. But we saw a really unique sort of vulnerability that our folks that are street vendors and micro entrepreneurs that work outdoors are facing. And so we really understood that, vendors themselves, the folks that are working outside, they don't have a brick and mortar, storefront or a place where they can deny ICE or Border Patrol or any law enforcement agency access. And so we know that ICE and Border Patrol presence has increased in California, and we know that this particular community is vulnerable for those agents, going out in public and conducting arrests and interrogations. And so our organizations really understood the need that this bill needed to be created to protect street vendors, to protect folks that are working outdoors, to make sure that the current existing sanctuary policies that exist, like SB 54, are also extended to workers that are outside. And apologies for the background noise. My dogs are freaking out right now. But we know that, so we already know that there are bills like AB 450, the Immigrant Worker Protection Act, as well as SB 54 that already provide sanctuary policies to prevent immigration enforcement from collaborating with local law enforcement. But one sort of piece that we noticed is that the agencies in the local municipalities, cities and counties that currently give vendors their permits, so they're in charge of going through the permitting process with vendors so that vendors can vend. We wanted to make sure that those agencies that are doing that work and are currently enforcing vending laws throughout the state are also covered under the protections of SB 54, meaning that they themselves are not allowed to interact or collaborate with immigration law enforcement agencies. So that's one of the parts of this bill that we wanted to make sure was in there, to make sure that there isn't that collaboration. And I think in addition to that, we also wanted to make sure that the private data that is collected on street vendors, for example, when folks are trying to get their permits, a lot of the times they have to share, their private information, their ITIN numbers, for example, their names, and that information we want to make sure is fully protected and not able to be shared with federal law enforcement. So that's another piece of this bill that we really wanted to emphasize, is that vendors' data needs to be protected. And then the other piece is really just making sure that the current permitting processes that exist in different parts of the state, in different counties and cities, some of those processes are very cumbersome and are very intrusive, with really no rationale behind it. So for some cities and counties, it's required that in order for vendors to get their permits, that they need to be fingerprinted, and that they need to go through federal background checks. And so we know for our folks that are vending that are undocumented, folks that may have prior criminal convictions in their past, et cetera, we want to make sure that that private data is being protected, and that it's not being shared with federal law enforcement agencies that could potentially put these vendors at risk for immigration enforcement. So those are the main tenets of this bill. We really saw the need, especially in municipalities across California that don't have very friendly vending policies towards immigrant vendors themselves. We really saw the need for this bill to make sure that those folks are protected. And I know that many of our organizations, whether it's us individually or whether it's our organizations, a lot of us work with street vendors on the ground. And so we want to make sure that the folks that are undocumented and folks that are vulnerable these days are protected under the provisions of this bill. So yeah, that's pretty much SB 635. We are going to have a hearing next week, April 2nd. The bill is going to the Senate Local Government Committee. And so we're excited to go there to have some vendors speak on their experiences and really share the importance and the crucial need for this bill. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for presenting on this. We know it's super important for our street vendors and to ensure that they're not being targeted as well. I will go ahead and pass it over to Eddie Torres with the Safety Net for All Coalition to talk a little bit more about what they're working on this year and what they want to uplift for April 9th. Eddie?
Thank you, Daniela. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Eddie Torres. I'm with the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice, and we're a proud member of the Safety Net for All Coalition. Over the years, we have passed several bills to the governor's desk, and unfortunately, the governor has vetoed the bills that would have created an unemployment benefits program for excluded workers. This would impact over 1 million exploited, undocumented workers in California. And we think that it's about time that we have something like this, especially coming off the back of a devastating pandemic, right, that we all saw. So we're really excited to be platforming this really important piece of legislation, especially when we have over 30, I think it's 37 new legislators, which is a huge turnaround, right? That's like 1/3 of the California legislators from both the Assembly and Senate. So there's a lot of education that we need to do on this bill. We can't let Democrats off the hook as well. We know that the national rhetoric on immigration isn't the strongest right now. It's very combative, it's very punitive, and we need to change that narrative, right? And Safety Net for All, I think, really cuts through all of that BS and says, hey, when the world shut down, who kept working? It was immigrants. When the fires happened in LA, who kept working? It was immigrants. And part of that is because of the exploitative nature of not having safety nets, not having unemployment benefits programs for workers to take time off to be with their families, to not be put in dangerous positions. So this is a really important bill, I think more important, more timely than ever. So just to rattle off a couple of facts here, 20% of all Californians under the age of 18 live with a non-documented loved one or are undocumented themselves. They are friends, they are neighbors, family, or coworkers, and confidants. Every day, undocumented immigrants contribute to California's economic prosperity, which I think at one point overtook the UK as the 5th or the 4th largest economy in the world. And again, that's largely off the backs of undocumented workers. Unemployment insurance has helped millions of Californians weather the biggest challenges facing our state. I can go back to the Great Recession back in 2008, when a lot of folks lost their jobs too, a lot of folks lost their homes as well. And still, there was no unemployment benefit program for undocumented Californians back then. And we're still facing those same circumstances now. From climate emergencies to natural disasters, we continue to exclude over 1 million workers, and we have to change that. Immigrants with regularly filed taxes, which contribute to 3.7 billion in annual in-state and local taxes, 3.7 billion annually in state and local taxes. That bears repeating. And we're asking for a fraction of the amount that would go into a excluded workers program from the taxes that we pay into, right? Our immigrant community pays taxes to go into EDD, to go into unemployment, but they themselves cannot tap into the same funds that they pay into. So that is a huge unjust part of our system here in California, and we need to drastically change that. So that's why it's important to platform safety net for all. I'm thankful for everybody that voted for it and for CIPC for supporting this really important piece of legislation that while we don't have a champion and author at the moment, again, the education is definitely needed. 37 new legislators, a governor that has been reluctant in the past, and hopefully in 2026 we have a governor that is more willing to work with us and actually write into law safety net for all. That's why this year is really important, nonetheless, whether we have an author or not. And we need all of you to continue voicing the support for safety net for all. So I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to share that. And I look forward to meeting you all in Sacramento in a couple of weeks. Back to you, Daniela. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. We are so grateful for all the presenters. We know that we are facing a really tough time in this nation. It's not the first time people of color, immigrants, poor people have been targeted by the powers of the state. But we know that the work that we're doing is continuing to push back. And while some of our priorities are in the uplifting, messaging, or pushing for stage, we know how important it's going to be to build up towards it next year as we continue this ongoing fight. We do have a couple minutes designated for questions, so I did want to get back to some people who were on the stack. We had Lynn have a question. I believe this is for Faith on AB 49. What about when the child leaves the school with ICE waiting outside for the child or the parent? Are there any protections there, or what happens? Faith, are you still on this call? And can you provide some context on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think right now AB 49 itself does not have the specific restrictions about when they leave a child, when the child's like close to the school zones. However, I do believe SB 49 might have some parts of it that talks about immigration enforcement. Oh, sorry, law enforcement should not be conducting such action near the school. So that could be something, if it hasn't been amended out, it could potentially be in SB 48 as well. The Senate part of the bill.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I mean, Lynn, Faith, getting the question.
You're welcome.
Also, thank you, Lynn, for the question.
I just wondered if you had heard of cases where they were being picked up when they left, and are people working on those? But
Yeah, I don't know about like nationwide, but I know that like Senator Linda Gonzalez did think about was thinking about this part, was trying to focus on this part. That's why she does have that provision about like a closer 1 mile radius, limiting law enforcement.
that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith and Lynn. Lynn, I do see your question about any bills that protect gardeners. I will follow up offline with more information about that, since we do have a couple more questions on the stack.
Yeah, it's because they're self-employed, so that's where the question comes from. Thank you.
Yes, I will definitely follow up with you. We also have a question from Jane. A few of us are looking into potential litigation against the rescission of the sensitive locations memo. Curious about what we can do immediately to protect kids and families while we also advocate for AB 49. Example, can we advocate the AG to also file for an injunction? And I believe this question's for you, Faith.
That's also a great question. I think that it's always important to share with the AG, who, prior to becoming AG. He's also really had a lot of pieces of legislation that protects immigrants. I think it is important to reach out to his office to see what they're working on in terms of, whether there's an injunction, possibly could potentially be a state action. So I definitely encourage you to talk with AG staff and make those suggestions. I know that they have a really great legislative team here in Sacramento.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Faith. And also just Daniela, CIPC, you guys are all rock stars and just bringing us all together. Just so grateful. I did leave a message on the public line for the AG's office because I'm trying to find ways to connect to the office. So I don't know if CIPC or others have access that you can help us with so that we can speak to him and bring this up. Would be grateful for any connections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. I will follow up on that point after this call as well, so we can get into the weeds a little bit more. Our next question is from Juana. Often numbers and statistics are convincing factors with people who are on the fence about supporting any bill. Where can we find this type of information to help us speak in support of these bills? This is a great question. So as part of the lobbying training and materials that you will receive for the day, you will receive policy platform background with helpful statistics and data that you need. But each of the presenters also have, I believe we're sharing their emails in the chat. Every sponsored bill has fact sheets that usually reference specific data that can help support and talk of these bills. So I think the best avenue, if there are any of the 6 bills that you're really interested in, or even if all 6, I would follow up with them individually if you want to get into the nitty-gritty. If not, once IDA gets a little bit closer, we will be sharing the resources in our policy platform backgrounder and our leave behind material as well. And then I see a comment from Louis or Louis. I could probably help on the 2 economic development issues. I'm a retired business professor and served as a business counselor on the WA Small Business Development Center at the Bellevue Entrepreneur Center. I'm also one of the founders of Dynamical Systems Research, Microsoft's first acquisition. Absolutely, we welcome your expertise and we welcome the expertise of anyone else on this call that can uplift and support the bills that we're working on and the bills that we're building up to really push through the legislature next year. And then I don't see any other questions on the chat as well. I do see that Shannon shared the USC Equity Research Institute. That's a great website with lots of research on immigrant communities and data that can also support a lot of the talking points that we've discussed today. As we are at the 2-minute mark, I want to uplift that our next legislative training is on April 3rd. My colleagues will go ahead and put the times in the chat. And for people who are also joining us through the buses and you are a bus captain, just a reminder that we will have an April 4th safety training for bus captains. And for everybody else, we will be sharing a document as well on the safety protocol. We know that this is a wild time to be alive, putting it lightly, and we want to ensure that our participants and our community feel safe at this event. So if there are any questions you have about it, please feel free to email one of us and we can connect you to the right person. We do have a protocol designed in place that we will be sharing as the date approaches closer. I will be one of the safety people for the day. So if you're seeing my face right now, it's a face you can go to the day of. Liliana, I see your hand. Not sure. And we are at the 1-minute mark, so I will put my contact in. It's on the slide. Liliana, I'm not sure if you want to write your question in the chat or I can follow up with you afterwards. We have about, We're right at the 11 o'clock mark, and I want to be mindful and respectful of all of your time. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. We are so grateful and excited to see you on April 9th and April 8th for those who will be at the conference. Liliana, I will follow up with you. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye.